When you say the name Kathleen Folbigg, you may get a few different reactions. Kathleen spent 20 years behind bars, found guilty on May 21, 2003, initially sentenced to 40 years in prison with a non-parole period of 30 years. Kathleen was released from prison on the 5th of June 2023 after science stepped in and gave an explanation as to what really happened to little Caleb, Patrick, Sarah and Laura. For the now 58-year-old, having spent 2 years out in the real world, just how hard is it to make people understand that you are actually innocent when for so long you were considered guilty? How do you emerge from that environment to form a new life after having so much of your young life taken away? I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. Kathleen Folbigg's life has been dissected in court and in the court of public opinion for decades. A young woman facing the worst a young mother could possibly face, the deaths of 4 babies, was also facing hate and vitriol from the Australian public, who saw her as a monster, of fellow prison inmates who saw her as a target, of a system that would take 20 years to catch up to her innocence. Kathleen and her best friend Tracy Chapman continue to advocate for women who find themselves in a similar situation. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today here on True Crime Conversations. We feel really honoured to have shared some of your story before, but to be able to sit down and speak to you about it and your experience, I think we feel very honoured that you've said yes to sit down with us today. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for allowing the time and letting everybody have a say. So yeah, it's good.
Now, I think we should start off by saying that Tracy was supposed to join us to chat today, but she has unfortunately got some technical issues, so she hasn't been able to join us. But I really did want to find out from you what it's been like for you, not just since your release, but the moment you found out while you were in jail that Tracy was fighting for you, that your friend had decided to take matters into her own hands and really fight for you. Do you remember that moment when you realized that that was happening outside the walls?
It was such a gradual thing. Like she started to visit me. I think primarily just as one of my dear friends in high school and one of my best friends. So she started to break the ice and visit me. But then, of course, when things start to happen, that legally meant we could take a few more extra steps. Yeah, her decision to go down the advocacy road where it was, of course it was major, and it's if anyone could have somebody like Tracy in my situation, they should go find one because she was pivotal in getting a lot of the stuff done. It's been described in the past as she sort of created a scaffolding that everybody and everybody else that jumped on that scaffolding to help out, and volunteer time and money and expertise and all the rest. Without Tracy, building the scaffolding in the first place, it may not have happened at all. She's pivotal as far as I'm concerned. And we both like to send the message that someone like Trace to do advocacy in such a big fashion like mine, there's a lot of costs that happen, and it's not just monetary. It's emotional, it's mental, it can affect what path you take down in life. It's all there's a humongous on flow and ripple effect that happens with it. So. For me, it was such a gradual thing, but I do recall saying to you, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And quite often saying, don't, um, you know, I would say during phone discussions, if there's things that you wish to do for yourself, please go do. Like, sort of thing, especially when we're hitting lulls and nothing was happening and we're all just wondering what the hell are we doing. It was, I always encouraged and just sort of said, look, if you've got stuff that you want to do, then please do. I said, and she tried and did, that sort of thing. I said, but unfortunately, to advocate for a case such as mine that's so complicated and so huge, because it is your friend, you put 120% in, um, she suffered, she didn't get the 120% back, sort of thing. I said, because that's the way the system is, unfortunately. So,
Well,
yeah.
arguably, she got her friend back, and that's probably more than enough payoff at the end of the day, right?
I know. Well, sort of thing. It's weird because we sort of like I've only been out like 2025, technically, 2 and a bit years or something now. Um, and we're both, she's at one end of the state and I'm at the other. I said, so we're actually no longer sort of really near each other with, sort of thing. So, and like life goes on, and it's just, it's an unfortunate thing to say, like she got her family life and her farm and her animals, and I've got a different direction that's heading. New partner, new home life, went back home, trying to decide what I'm going to do with my future as such. And so we try to stay in touch and be in touch as friends, sort of thing. I said, and that's all you do. That's all you can do. But of course, she knows that I'm always here for her if she needs me, and I know that she's always there. I said, so it's a prick quack sort of thing. I said, so, and I don't think that'll ever change. I don't care. We could be 80 and on walking frames and probably still doing it. I said, so, we often used to joke about that. Um, as a friend, the best. I said you couldn't ask for anything better. Um, and we have ups and downs, and we can argue like a blarmy when we're not agreeing on something. Uh, so because she can be quite forthright, and I'm very forthright once I get going.
Two peas in a pod.
And yeah,
You mentioned there that you moved back home, and
yeah,
home for you is Newcastle.
yeah.
What was that like for you to go back to a place that would have been so familiar 20 years ago and now is a strange new place?
I didn't sort of look at it like a strange new place. Like I came home and the navigation and the basic outlay of Newcastle hasn't really changed. What I did discover was that there's a roundabout every 5 seconds, which takes a bit of getting used to.
It's getting a bit
And
Canberra-esque,
train
Newcastle, isn't
lines
it?
no longer
Yeah.
exist, and stations have disappeared, and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Shopping centres seem to have grown exponentially and take up whole city blocks. I said, so those sorts of things I had to get used to. But basic streets of where I used to hang when I was a kid or learnt to drive or in my younger life are all still there. So the basic layout is my hometown. Um, so, to me, it was also I think I was just determined to go home because it was to me like a finishing of a complete circle. Okay, my circle went one way and got disrupted, and I went off on all sorts of weird paths as to where life sort of goes. Totally uh, not expecting it to end up where it ended up. I said, but I was determined to make it end up back in Newcastle and say, I'm home now and let's get on with life and let's go forward.
I think we are so intensely interested in what your life is looking like now because that transition for you, like so much has changed in the time that you're incarcerated. I
Mhm,
mean, technology has changed almost to a place where it would be unrecognizable if you were to drop someone into it 20 years
mhm,
after they've left it.
mhm.
And, people have changed, relationships with people have changed. What's the thing that you think you've struggled to come to terms with the most? We all presume it's something like technology, but you've connected to us. We use a program called Riverside. You're on your laptop. You seem to be quite fine with technology. But what is the things that you're finding the most difficult to navigate in this new world?
Um, I just I struggle a little bit with how much life becomes a pressure for people these days. You go back 20 odd years, I feel like people were far more relaxed in how they were going about things. Whereas
Mm.
everything now seems to be on fast forward, high speed. People have to have, t- you know, 18, 19 hours out of a day of a 24-hour period just to get anything done. I said, which is, sad for me because I'm just sort of like, oh gosh, no such thing as your 9 to 5 job anymore. I said it
Hmm.
exists, but people go to work at 7:30 instead of 9 and end up there until 7:30, 8, 9 o'clock before they're finished. I said, so that's sort of the amount of pressure that people are under to cope with the cost of living that seems to have skyrocketed and gone through the roof in 20 years. I
Yeah.
said, so that was a big eye opener for me. And yes, technology is a little bit, yeah, I succeeded in doing this, but as I said, I was here for half an hour pressing buttons to make sure that I could. and who knows what I've affected somewhere else along the line by doing it. You know, so I'll probably find I've lost one of my own programs somewhere along the way. You know, and the whole, I find it quite disconcerting that there is a lack of communication, conversation, and people just don't look up anymore. It's all this,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know how many times pedestrians have just gone and marched out in the middle of the road, and I've had to go, whoa, because they have not even looked up to see if they were going to get hit by a car. So I do find that a little disconcerting.
Have you
Um,
succumbed to the screen yourself though, Kathleen? Like, are
I
you
try really
scrolling?
hard to. At a certain time of the night, it's off and I don't look again.
Yeah.
And I have a bad habit of just leaving it somewhere and forgetting to bring it with me,
Yeah.
because I'm not, I can take the dog for a walk a good 20 minutes and go, "Oh, left the phone at home. Too bad if anything happens to me because I don't have my
We could all learn a
phone."
thing or two from you, I tell you.
So yeah, it takes a bit of getting used to. Facebook, I only do as in, I've got some friends on there, a few, and that's it. I don't sort of do anything else. Um, Google's my friend on the laptop, I must say. I find
Yeah.
out a lot of interesting stuff. So probably more than I need to know.
Have you Googled
But
yourself?
uh, I have occasionally had a look and just been shocked at how much stuff's actually up there. And to realize and to see that it's even on YouTube of all places, I'm just sort of like, oh my goodness, but it is what it is. And I made the decision to open up and give some information because everyone seemed to be just so wanting to know. Um, that I thought, there's a few bubbles that needed bursting, and some correct information that needed to come out. So that was one of the reasons why I said yes, okay, and decided to swallow the fear and just start doing some interviews and go for it. So
Can you take us back to the day you were actually released from prison? Because we'd heard rumblings via the New South Wales Supreme Court that potentially something might be happening. And then it all happened so very quickly. And then all of a sudden you were just out. And we were all scrambling because we are like, we weren't expecting this to happen right now. So there's us
yeah.
journalists frantically typing away on our keyboards to let everyone know that Kathleen was out. But what was that
Mhm.
experience like for you on that day? Did you know something was coming? Was there any inkling that you were going to be released that day? What did that day look like for you?
Well, we were all just hoping that that day was going to roll around. We didn't think it would take as long as it did.
Mm.
After His Honourable Bathurst put down his basic finding, saying, nothing to see here. Not sure why she's still there. Yeah, there was a good few months of still wandering around working and having to live the jail life, with staff even saying, "Why are you still here?" And others, none of us knowing. So it was sort of like just treading water, waiting to see, were they going to do the right thing and give a pardon and release, or what were they going to do? Or were we going to have to keep fighting and scrambling to sort of get someone to say something? Um, so even though we wanted it to happen and we sort of knew it was going to eventually, it was almost like wet fish in the face because it was all very sudden, and
Mm.
unjust. It was just so a bit of a shock. And that particular day, I was just working in jail like normal, and sent upstairs to see the boss, thinking I'm in trouble for something, and then get told, by the way, you've been pardoned. We're releasing you right now. Off you go. Get in that car. You're gone. So it was all just such a rush.
Did you think for a second,
Um,
like, someone's taking the piss here?
oh,
Like,
for
is there ever a
sure.
minute?
Yes, yes, for sure. Because I think I delayed in actually answering him, and then I actually swore at the poor man, I'm pretty sure, pretty much saying, "You gotta be effing kidding me." I said because it was all just a bit too
Yeah.
sudden and a bit too yeah. Um, and I'm sure when you ask Tracy about it, she'll be able to tell you the horrendous stories she had because it was also she wasn't told. No one was told in advance, and not even my legal team was told.
Right. So everyone's like, just
Uh
get in the car, everyone,
Yes, it
go.
was literally,
Yeah.
literally get in the car. I said, so to be in borrowed clothes that weren't even mine and a beautiful outfit, that had been chosen, didn't get to be worn and all sorts of stuff. I said it was all very, um, you know, shots of me getting out of a van holding a pair of shoes that I probably should have had on my feet, but weren't even thinking about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and later going, why am I hanging on to my shoes? It was all just very, very fast. I said, so yeah.
Well, I'd love to get an understanding from you about what jail life was actually like for you, because I think the thing that strikes me the most I mean, the trauma that you've experienced going into prison aside, you're still a very young woman when you go to prison. And you still haven't really grown into the person that you're going to be yet. You still have a lot of life experience to be had in order to, become who you're going to become. And then you go into a prison system where people who are accused of crimes like you had been are considered amongst the worst of the worst, right? So they have to put you in solitary confinement. So how do you even grow as a human being when you're still that young with so much growing to do when there's no one around you to grow with?
That's a very good question. I sort of think growing occurred, but because of the situation and environment that I'm in, um, I would say it was, the only thing it really did was cement my strength, cement the stoicism, cement the stubbornness, and cement, the word resilience has been used and all those sorts of words. So that sort of environment, yes, it helps cement and strengthen those sort of qualities. Whether I would have gone and had all those had not been in prison, who can say? I've always been a bit stubborn and had a bit of a strength thing about me. I said, but I don't think it would have developed into such the, you know, uh, giant shoulders and major backbone that I ended up with. I said it would have been a more sedate version, I'm sure. Um, I always say to people, okay, I was, 34, 35 when I went in. So there was a life had before that. And I tended to um, always hang on to that and say, okay, it's not a case of going in at 18 and having no life whatsoever
Mm.
and not even knowing what you're doing or why. Um, at 35, my basic life skills, personality was set, the whole lot, and all that sort of stuff. I said, so I used to always go back and keep saying to people, hang on a minute, I was a fully grown adult by the time I come in here. Um, and I had to try to keep standard values and things that the core of myself, I had to keep strong and remind myself to try and stay true to that core of who I thought I was as much as possible. It can be made tough and very hard to do so when you're in an environment like that. And I had many a time where I slid behavior wise and was just the basic naughty girl. I said so, but it was all in defense of trying to survive and kept telling myself, even if all the legal stuff doesn't work, 2028, I'm out whether these people like it or not. So I have to suck it up and do what I need to do. So that's how I dealt with it. But everyone's an individual and everyone deals with things way differently. I've had a lot of women say to me, if I'd have lost one, I would have fallen apart. You've lost four and you've been in prison for it. How have you coped? My answer to that is I believe that everybody has a strength in there, and when they're forced to find it, it's there. Some people have struggled and don't find it. Others find it. Some people, can do it reasonably easily. Others can't, and others really fight. Well, I wouldn't say that I did it easily, but I just think it could have something to do with, the beginnings of my life and how tough the beginning of my life was. I sort of already had a bit of a backbone, and that helped me cope and survive with what I had to go through for those 20 years.
That's the
Yeah.
thing is I don't think a lot of people realize that your story starts so much earlier than the birth of your first child because you do, find out somewhat older child that your mother is actually was murdered by your father
Mhm.
and you're then, handed off to relatives who then make you wards of the state and you've had to sort of
Yep.
fight pretty much tooth and nail from the very beginning of your life. Do you think that that might have added to that resilience? Because I mean that would have broken a lot of people emotionally, if not psychologically.
I'm a firm believer for me that it did. I've heard third-hand stories of me at 18 months old or 2 years old, being quite independent and just deciding I'm gonna do this or do that.
Mm,
And, um, even at 3 or 4, not tolerating bullies or people who are picking on other people. I said, so it was already there.
mm.
Um and developed, and sort of semi-stayed that way, but developed and evolved being in a tough situation in a tough environment like prison. I said so. Um, I did, it's most a lot of my friends that I've met along the way. We met. a couple of them I met because I was actually in defense of them against somebody else.
Mm.
I sort of said, and that's how we've connected and that's how we've met. Um, and, I've got a friend of mine who's over 6'2", and she was being bullied in high school, and I didn't have a bar of that. I said, so we connected,
Yeah.
sort of thing. I said, which was quite ironic that I'm just this little 5'5", you know, telling people rack off, sort of thing. Go pick on someone else, So it was already there. I already had it as a backbone. Um, third-hand stories of me at 18 months old wandering around because, my mother, for all intents and purposes, I didn't, I can honestly sit here and say I don't remember, I don't recall, I
Mm.
couldn't tell you what she looked like other than a picture that I've seen. Don't really know much or anything about her. Um, I have heard that she was, very free-spirited and just did, as she pleased, and that she was kind-hearted and whatever else. But unfortunately for me, by the time she had me, she had developed a bit of a drinking and a gambling problem. So not the
Mm.
same human being at all. And third-hand stories of me just wandering around, pretty much taking care of myself in a singlet and nappy at 18 months old. What does that say? Sort of
Yeah.
thing. I'd already started to, try to do the best I could even at that age. I said, so yeah, I think it's sort of I think what happens to you in your life, trauma-wise or whatever, it can mold you into who you are. And I guess it depends on how much, I've been lucky. I've had quite a bit of mental health help for coping, and especially whilst I was inside. And
Mm.
now that I'm out, it'll be an eternal thing. Some people don't get that to be able to help them. I said so they may suffer, far more than what I'm suffering. Um, but I am mindful of, the fact that my situation and all the people who helped me with it, especially my close friends and stuff, they suffered mentally and all that along the way as well. I said that, so there was, as I said, there was a ripple effect to, if you want to stand beside me or help me out, there was a ripple effect that you could be affected by it.
Mm.
And as upsetting as that was to me, at the time I was dealing with trying to cope and mentally sustain myself as well. I said so. But yeah, I think, whatever your core person is, that's who you are. Yeah, so
Kathleen, I'm sitting here thinking, as you're telling me these stories of how resilient you are, about the moment that arrives in this conversation where we have to talk about the deaths of your children.
yeah.
It's a really awful thing to talk about. It is, I mean, I have a kid. I now can, like, when your story broke, I wasn't a mum. So I looked at your story very differently than the way I do now that I do have a child. And it changes you. Having a baby physically, fundamentally changes who you are. You become a mum. It's a second life for you. And so talking to another mum about the death of her babies, it is such a tricky thing to bring up. I want to know how you feel about talking about your children when they have been such a focus of your entire existence, from becoming a mum, where they do become your entire existence, to everything that then you've gone through in losing them one after the other and having to recover from the trauma of those, in still wanting to become a mum and becoming pregnant again and being able to process that into a place where you can be okay with being pregnant and having another baby and not, pass away from anxiety yourself. How do you feel about talking about your babies with people like me? We are strangers, and yet this is a conversation you're going to keep having with people until, maybe forever.
Well, I had to accept the fact that that's who I'm known as.
Mm.
I'm known as the poor woman that lost 4 children, went to prison for it, and managed to win the case and then get back out. That's who I'm known as.
That's the long
Um,
story short, yes.
yeah. Discussing and talking about my children, I used to be quite coveted of memories, and tended not to share, because, um, for me, I don't have the big banking vault of memories in regards to them. I have
Mm.
a select few. Um, the trauma of losing them, for me, it's hard to describe because I sometimes still use it if I'm in a traumatic situation that I don't think I'm handling very well. I have what they call it's almost like a deflective shield that sort of just comes up. Almost like I step outside myself, and I just don't tend to. Um, I may be answering you, but it's very monotone. I can go a little
Mm.
monotone,
Mhm.
and not because it blocks me from feeling too much as such. Um, I try not to do that these days because, as far as I'm concerned, for everything that I went through, my children existed, and um, I would never ever deny that they did. I said so. It's a rough edge knife edge that I sort of run on when I'm talking about the kids. Um, it's the decision to keep having them. There were times when I decided no, I wasn't going to. Like
Mm.
after Sarah, when I lost my third one, I went in and discussed having my tubes tied because
Mm.
I just wasn't even going to go there. Um, but considering I wasn't, either 30 or something quite yet, or only just over, doctors said to me, "We can't, you're too young." And I got denied, pretty
Yeah,
much being able to
right.
do it because they were concerned I was doing it for an emotional reason, not a, you know, and that made no sense to me because I'm sitting there saying to the doctor, how am I supposed to differentiate from an emotional reason as to why I don't, sort of thing. But, there was a few years that went between Sarah and then deciding to go with Laura. Um, but, the stress, mass stress of worrying constantly, and ended up being quite paranoid when Laura came around. Um, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. I said because it was, I'm not going to say it was a terrible decision because it wasn't. I met Laura and she was beautiful and wonderful and a joy of my life. Um, so it wasn't a bad decision as far as I was concerned in the end. But yeah, to make the decision, that was quite a racking process to go through. And of course, I had a husband at the time to be considering. Um, and when you go down these roads, I think what I sort of lacked in my relationship with Craig was conversation. We rarely ever
Mm.
actually really truly spoke about stuff. And I think that's vitally important. You really need to communicate. So for anyone else that was going through something like mine, who's trying to decide whether they're going to have another child or not, I would always be saying, well, make sure you have those conversations and you make them deep, you make them mean, and you make them last, and you really make sure, sort of thing. Um, so because I have said to friends in the past sometimes that, if Caleb, my very first one, had survived, I may not have had the other three. I might have
Mm.
just been quite happy enough to have been a single parent, single child household.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not how fate, not path, and not where we went. So yeah. But trauma for me is like, everyone always says you've suffered so much trauma. Why are you even still standing? Why you're not rocking in a corner somewhere? And my answer to that is because I guess everyone's individual on how they process these things. I said
Yep.
so. Um, Everyone says, "Oh, you've never had the chance to grieve," and I'm like, "Well, technically, that's wrong." I did actually go to all four funerals. And you go through the grieving process by the time you're getting around to a funeral.
Mm.
You've got the weeks and weeks after a funeral. That are the most depressing parts of your life that you're ever going to come across. Um, but eventually, everyone around you, moves on. I said you can't keep, you know, staying in that grief mode. It's not healthy. You've got to try and attempt to get on with your life in some fashion and decide which direction you want to take it in. And that's exactly what I did. I kept moving forward. Um, Others didn't. I don't think my ex-husband moved forward. I think he was always lagging behind a little. And I think in the end, I just moved forward a bit too far, and we ended up separating. And yeah, so um, I still do that now. Moving forward is my sole focus. There's
Mm.
no dwelling on past too much. There's no lamenting it. You can't change the past. Um, I try really hard not to have any negativity or toxic thoughts about the past, and or people that have offended or hurt or betrayed or done whatever. I try very hard to just sort of go, okay, well, those decisions have been made. That's the path they've chosen. This is the path I'm taking, and we just have to go forward from there. So
Does that extend that sort of moving forward and not worrying too much about the past is extended to police and how investigators handled your case? Because, like, when you
Don't
read,
get me wrong, if when I get police pulling up next to us in the car, I can be a tad nervous.
really, I mean, that
So,
happens to all of us,
it's an
but to you
automatic.
especially.
Yes, it's an automatic thing. There's a bit of a funny story when I first got my license and I had to be pulled over for my very first breath test. The window came down and I was so nervous that I think I was fumbling and stuttering a little. So he probably thought something wrong with this lady
Mhm.
because she's not reacting. And I had to find my license and give it to him. And once I'd given it to him, uh, he's looked at it and I think he's then looked at me, and then he's just gone, "Thanks very much. Here, you can go." So I don't know. Don't know to this
So
day
your
whether or not it was
infamy
a
might have
case of
worked in your favor in
he
that
it might have worked in
moment.
my favour. I don't know whether he recognised the picture and just went, "Oh, geez, just let this one go," or
Yeah.
whether he was just being kind, or whether it was, I blew in the thing and blew nothing. I said, so
Mhm.
it was all a case of,
Yeah.
standard thing. Um, but yeah, I don't think it's necessarily police for me that I might have a bit of a negative reaction to. But if you start talking to me about detectives and some of their tactics, well, then that's a
Mhm.
different.
Well,
Because the
yeah,
one
because
I
when
had,
I
yeah,
read
yeah,
into how, especially how they confronted your ex-husband, Craig,
yes,
they really, when you look at the conversations that were had, it feels very leading, like they led him into making a decision. And then that sort of tarnishes your relationship with him from
mhm,
that point on, because he spends the rest of his time believing that you are guilty and that there is no way that it could possibly be otherwise.
yeah,
And the way that they've treated you in that process too is, I mean, on reflection, there are a lot of decisions that were made that the conversations that were had with you, a grieving young mother, should not have happened in the way that they did. So how do you feel about those detectives and the way they handled your case?
I it's a hard call because uh, as far as I'm concerned, police and detectives are needed in our society. We can't do without them. Um, But of course, in any major organizations, I'm sure you have good, bad, and average. I said, so it's just how it rolls. Um, yes, some of the tactics and things that we used to make sure that a case was built for me. I sit here now and go, okay, you take it right back to even when he was first, he first approached the DPP about my matter and was pretty much told, "You're going to need more. There's not enough here." I said, so he on his own, from what we can gather, just kept going. I said, so it was sort of like, "Okay, you were just told there's not enough here, but you still got enough to me anyway." That's where, I can sit and go and shake my head and sort of go, "Would that happen today? I'm not sure." I'd hope that hopefully some lessons were sort of learnt here, especially on how you treat, um, grieving people. I
Mm.
said, because it's sort of like to wanna speak to a grieving person at a hospital straight up when their brain's not even connected, because they're growing traumatically through so much stuff. I'm not sure that's a good thing to do. I said, because yeah, that things are said or not said or inferences made and all sorts of things. Um, but to build a case on that, I do find that a little on the offensive side, and it's just sort of like, that I hope you learnt your lesson. Don't do that again. I said, because it's not a good thing to do. Um, he's I sort of keep telling myself he had a job to do, and he certainly went and did it. I said, so I can't really say that much more about it. I'm not going to say I hate the man because I don't personally know him enough to say you hate him. You don't hate someone that you don't know,
Yeah.
sort of thing.
But how do you feel
Yeah,
about the use of, say, your diaries as evidence? Because,
that, as far as I was concerned, was offensive,
mm,
and um,
like,
to
we've all
have them
written
here.
things in our diaries in the
Oh,
moment that make no
I don't
sense
know
or that make
how many
sense
of
at the
them.
time. Like,
Yes.
could be taken in any which way,
Oh,
depending on your mental
absolutely.
health that day, right?
Absolutely, and, I don't know how many people, especially women, who's the majority, if you look at percentages, it's usually women that write in these sorts of things. Um, So it's to me to use something like that, and only pluck out certain words and then weaponize was to me the disgusting thing to do, and we all agreed on that. It didn't matter who we spoke to or but how you can get that point across in a legal world is a total different, sort of thing. My defences teams tactic was to simply say, "Nothing to see here. Don't know why you're
Mm.
using them. Nothing
Mhm.
to see here." Well, that wasn't good enough, and I got done for them anyway. And they were used in a specific way to make sure that a case was bolstered, and that the case was pretty much built up around them. I said so. For all intents and purposes, I didn't really have hope. I was going down whether I liked it or not because of the sign of the times, the fact that Meadow Law still existed and was threading through everything even way back then. Um, didn't really have hope, actually. I said so.
So you were really
In the
aware
end,
of that, and you knew that in that time when you were facing court? Were
probably
you
not
aware
back
of that?
then. No,
Yeah.
no, probably not back then.
Mm.
I was always hopeful, but I was fairly ignorant, naive, and I kept thinking that the system would listen to me at some point and get it right. I said so. To eventually find out and you land in prison, blinking, going, "Well, that didn't work. I don't know what's going on there." But it's too late by then. I said so. Precedents have been set, legal arguments have been done. I said you start to become history when it comes to students looking up things and doing and all that sort of stuff. So it's a tough it's literally a case of, you know, how do you defend your random thoughts that come out of your head that you were silly enough to stick on a bit of paper, and then someone goes and reads them, and every individual has a different way of interpreting something
Mm.
that they might read. I said, so, and I can still do it now. Something might flash up on the news and I'll read it and go, oh, wow, that means blah, blah, blah. And yet my partner can be sitting next to me and go, I didn't read that. I think that reads blah, blah, blah. And I'm
Mhm.
like, it's a prime example,
Yeah.
and sometimes I can still write stuff even today and someone will read it and then not really understand what it's come from and take it in a totally different way. So, um, it's an eternal argument, really. It's an eternal thing that just keeps going.
So
So,
you said then, like, you land in prison wide-eyed and blinking and wondering how the hell you ended up here. Like I mentioned before, you had to go into solitary confinement because people who are accused of killing children are often targeted by other inmates.
yeah.
How, because that goes for a couple of years, but how do you then transition into the general population, and how do you protect yourself from being a target at that point? Like, I imagine you didn't have too many hand-to-hand combat skills going into prison at that time as a 30-something-year-old
No.
woman. Like, how do you
Yeah.
defend yourself?
Um, for me personally, I basically, it was almost like I put up the shield of bravado, and because I knew in my heart that they all got it wrong and I wasn't supposed to be there, it very quickly dawned on me, though, that I couldn't keep saying that because when you're in there in a situation and you're in a prison for what you're in there for, like mine, it doesn't matter how much you protest. As far as they're concerned, the court stuck you there, so you did it. I
Yeah.
said, so you don't. It's no point in you jumping up and down saying, "But I didn't," blah blah blah. So I learnt to go quiet on that side of things. So for me, it was more of a I think I drew down on the backbone that I already sort of semi had, and there was a lot of bravado pretty much going on, and the ability sometimes to talk, and eventually talk someone down. If I thought that they weren't actually seriously wanting to hurt me, that they just were yelling at me and screaming and blustering and carrying on, um, there was quite a percentage of times where I could say some stuff that just made them stop and blink, and they would go, still swear at me, but they would walk away just shaking heads instead of continuing to abuse me. Um, I also did the thing of, past someone, they might be negative and giving you glary eye every time they look at you. But I used to walk past going, "Hey, how you going?" every time.
Yeah.
And sooner or later you catch them out and they
So
go,
you
"Oh,
killed them with
hey,"
kindness in the end.
you know, sort of thing. So it probably took, I'd say within about 5 years, people the most of the women had realized, she's here to stay, we can't get rid of her, And the standard argument I was always saying was, you say I don't belong in here. Where would you like me to go?
Mm.
You provide me with, this is where I am. We're all wearing the same green tracksuit. We all bleed red blood if anything happens to us. I said, and we're all female here. And so therefore, in that respect, no matter what anybody does, we should be banding together a little bit, not continually fighting and carrying on with each other. So I tried to use logic as much as possible when it came to talking. But of course, you get some women in there who just don't hear logic. They're totally illogical. So in that respect, um, I think it was literally a case of defending myself by having so much backbone and bravado meant that they were a little unsure how I would react if they took me on. I said, so that grey area of whether I was going to fight with them or not, 90% of the time was enough for people to go, yeah, we'll just leave that one. So but everybody deals with, as I said, I had so many women, there was about, when I was in there, the number grew up to about 10 of us women who were in for similar sorts of things, and every one of us was different on how we chose to handle other inmates. So we were never really in main population, but we did end up in wings that were 30 to 40 women strong. I said, so it's still, you're still battling to survive the so-called hierarchy of prison. I said, so
Where
yeah.
would you sit in the hierarchy?
Uh, I was never queen bee, put it that way, but I was never down the bottom either. It was, I simply just chose to have my head down, stay out of other people's business, which is what you do, and worked as much as possible. And I think once staff figure out that you're a hard worker and they can get you to do stuff, and then they can rely on you to do it, you spend far less time hanging around a whole lot of women who are gossiping and just becoming negative in general. I used to always try to align myself with people who would joke and laugh and be merry rather than those who were too focused on being victims, and crying and lamenting that why they were there. And you know it was People are always surprised when you say that you would laugh while you're in prison, but there are some absolutely cracker humorous things that can happen in a prison. And if you don't have a sense of humor, what are you supposed to do? I do have a rather dark sense of humor, so it's not um, but the prisoners can, make light of any situation if it helps them cope with why they're there. So, yeah.
Do you then leave all that behind, Kathleen? Like, do you step away from prison? These are people you've spent decades with and staff that you would have interacted with every single day. Do you just leave all that behind when you leave prison, or do you stay in contact with people?
I've got a handful of dear friends that I made whilst I was inside, and because I was extremely picky and choosy about who I made friends with. And I used to say that I would make friendly acquaintances and friendlies, never friends.
Hmm.
But occasionally one would sneak in that I would have more relatable with. Um, so probably one, two, three. I probably got about four, if that. And one lady that is still inside that she rings and we have a chat, and I like to hear that she's doing well, and that her plans for getting out, which turned out to be, if I'd stayed in there, we both would have been going for parole in 2028, 6 months apart. I said,
Hmm.
so, she's still doing very well, and I know she's going to succeed when she gets out. I said, so, but they are people who are capable of turning things around, and not drowning in the seriousness and the traumatic side of being in prison. So.
So you've mentioned a few times that moving forward has been a focus for pretty much your entire life and has helped you remain resilient in times rather than looking back and wallowing in self-pity or in grief. So where does forward look like for you? Because you and Tracy have written a book together, which you have been touring around the place and really telling your story and advocating for women who find themselves in this situation, which interestingly at the time when you were before the courts, it was like unheard of that 4 children could all, die from SIDS from the same family. And it's, been revealed over time that is in fact not the case and that it has happened to other families. And so your advocacy is now making sure that people understand your story and how it can, be applied to many others.
Mm.
Is that where future Kathleen lives in the advocacy space. Does she have other dreams that we're looking forward to?
I oh, that's how cool. I don't mind doing things like this. I don't mind if women wish to speak and talk about um, how you cope with things like this. I'm a firm believer that strength is an inward thing. I said everybody has it; it's there. You just have to tap and find it. Um, so, it's doing this sort of thing. I thought I would be quite shy and reserved and inward with it and not be able to do it, but it seems I'm doing quite fine. Um, the book for me was a very cathartic thing to do, and I tapped into, I wrote journals most of my life, so I think I tapped into that ability to just write stuff, and, with help from, editors and everything else that, the crew that we did have to
Sorry
do
to
the book.
interrupt, but you're not concerned that anyone's going to look at these journals at some stage and misinterpret them?
No, yeah, so, don't get me wrong, you'll never get me writing in another one, but, writing seems to be something I enjoy doing, and it's like whether it's a flair or something I've got, who knows? The future for me, I might travel to go down that path again and just see if I can do something, and keep writing in such a fashion, yeah, doing talks around the place, and encouraging women that I think my message is basically, um, whatever you're going through, traumatic or not, if you've got a group of friends that are helping to hold you up and you've got the scaffolding around you, you survive, and you can come out the other side. And even for those who don't have that, there are so many organizations and that out there these days that can help you through that sort of stuff. Um, I think my message just is there is life after, and you just have to make the decision that you want it. I said, so that's my message. I'm pretty an ordinary girl. I don't, I'm not, planning on, going. People say, "Oh, how would you like to go bungee jumping, skydiving, and doing all these things?" And I'm shaking my head, going, "I didn't spend 20 years in prison to go jumping out of a plane and kill myself. It's just not."
I have
I've
life
got
left to live now. I'm not putting
yeah,
it at risk,
that's
right?
right.
Yeah.
I said, so, I enjoy simpler things, like walking the dog, or just sitting on the lounge with her and patting her is a glorious thing for me.
Mm.
Staring out a window, watching life go by, my best thing ever. I'm quite a people person watcher, and I love to, do that sort of thing. Um, it's simple things like walks, sunrises, sunsets. I'm still enjoying all of those things. Good food, enjoying a little bit too much, unfortunately. But it's sort of like, so it's more simple for me. I enjoy the simpler things in life, and I would be quite happy to spend the next 30 years if I'm lucky to do that. If I go off on the other paths and I write and I talk and I do these sorts of things, podcasts and whatever, to me they're an added bonus. And if I'm helping anybody along the way, that's great too. Yeah, I don't mind doing that. Um, we've still got, whole, there are other people that are going to tackle the whole legal reform in an attempt to try to, reform our system a little because it does unfortunately need it. Everyone who's been in to do with my case believes that, a CCRC, a criminal case review commission is needed. Um, and that uh, that would be a fairer way to do things. I said, I believe that, if there had been that sort of committee or a commission available at the time when my stuff all hit the fan, so to speak, I may not have ended up in prison for as long as I was in there.
Mm.
It could have been looked at, reviewed, taken on board, but we just sort of think, there was an awful lot of, in my case particular, an awful lot of not listening going on because the decision had been made, the path chosen, and we had so much trouble with the same information. Once you get denied appeals and and you're on a trial, you get found guilty, it's so hard to get the system to look or hear or see anything else. And every time you're in front of a judge, they're going off the same information all the time, and it's very difficult to get them to look us sideways in any way. Um, to go by the time I'd gone to Bathurst, you were looking at, I think it was nearly 18 old judges I'd sat in front of in
Mm.
20 years. But he was the first semi progressive one that went, okay. There
Let's
could be
actually
something
look
here.
at
Let's have
it.
a listen and see what's
Yeah.
going on. I said, so it's just unfortunate it took 20 years to get there. So, um, reform needs doing. Um, I can't see myself being a big forefront when it comes to the reform side. I've always said I'm happy to be rolled out if my face case and me speaking helps in that manner. But I'm not likely to be up at Parliament steps with a big placard and knocking on doors and saying you need to change something, because I think that it needs to come from inside the system. The system needs to change. So that's where it needs to come from. Yeah.
Just finally, Kathleen, I want to understand from you how you feel that place in your heart of mum.
Mhm.
With Caleb making you a mum, and then Patrick and Sarah and Laura all adding to that, and then your ability to become a mum again is cut off completely. You have that option is taken away from you as you're sent to prison. How do you feel that place in your heart? Because you are a mother, how do you then express that now that you're a free woman again?
I I I will always say I'm mum. I simply say I'm a childless mum,
Mm.
sort of thing. So as cruel as that sounds, that is what I am. Um, I can still walk down the street, and spot, especially little toddlers, will make me smile no end.
Mm.
And especially when they're just, there was a little kid down the street, not long ago at the shopping centre I was at, had ran away a bit from his parents. His parents didn't even really realise because they were busy doing something. He's kicking things around, he's doing whatever he wanted to, and I just simply smiled, looked at him, and said, "Let be that age again where you just don't care. You're just doing your own thing."
Mm.
And then parents, of course, went, "Oi," sort of thing. So, um, sometimes, I've been to dinners and things with friends, and some of them have had little ones there, grandchildren, of course. Um, at the time and the night, I'm fine with it, and I can relate and do whatever. But I do suffer the next day with the depression hit. I said,
Mm.
so it's a response that's just automatic. I tend to want to not really go out, or not see anyone, and I just need that time to go. Well, as pleasant as that was, that hurt. I said, so I can still have quite painful moments with it all. And Mother's Day, I'm not a fan of because I don't get to celebrate it like everybody else. So I tend to steer clear of it. I said, so there's just little things like that. I said, so I always say I'm a mum, and everyone else will say, you're a mum, Kath, and that's all there is to it. I said, yes, but unfortunately, I'm in the relegated, unfortunate club of being a childless mum. I said, so it's a pain there that'll be there forever. It's never going to go away. People say time heals. I said I don't believe that. I think time lessens, not necessarily heals. Because Caleb would be, gosh, nearly 36. He said
Mm.
if he'd have been around, he would be about 36 now. I said so. All of my children would have been grown adults, moved on, and I possibly could have been a grandmother by now.
Mm.
I said so. Little things like that. I sort of go, that's a bit painful. But I used to live vicariously through everybody else's children, especially when I was inside. Tracy's son Presley, who I adore, he grew up in front of me, but I never actually met him until
Yeah.
I was released that day. I said so. And my other friends' children too. I heard about them, heard about all their exploits, but yeah, it's very different. So it's I don't. Well, people probably don't know this, but I've not had a child in my arms since. I said, so that I think the first day I do, when someone hands me a baby and says, "Can you just watch this?" I'll be like,
Mm.
I'm not sure how that will go.